Hello BookTube and welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing a SFF Babble and it is reading tips for beginners. My number one tip for anyone beginning to read anything in any kind of genre, ask a librarian. I'm not a librarian, but I love my librarians, my library people. They are fantastic for recommending books, especially if you get to know them. I'm lucky enough to work in a high school, so I go in and my librarian tells me, hey, this book came in, I think it's your kind of book. If you ask a librarian, hey, I'm looking to get into reading, insert genre here, they will quite happily tell you, if they are worth their salt, which books you should start with. So that is my number one tip for beginning readers of sci-fi and fantasy. Ask a librarian. The next tip I have is to do what I did, and that is start with satire or comedy. So you know, if you've seen my channel much, you know what's coming. So you know it's coming, I know it's coming. My sci-fi recommendation, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I adore this book. I read the whole series once a year during my tradition of sitting in a coffee store on a Friday morning and having my breakfast before I go to work. I sit on my Kindle, I read a Douglas Adams book. It's what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. Incredibly relaxing. I sit and giggle to myself and look like a crazy person. A lot of fun. That's my sci-fi recommendation. My other recommendation, my fantasy recommendation, Discworld. Terry Pratchett and this man, Douglas Adams, are my muses, my relaxation, my absolute reading favorites. So Discworld, easy, nice sort of slow introduction to fantasy. Nothing's kept seriously. Wonderful, wonderful way to start reading. And in the beginning ones, they're quite small as well. My next one, if you're not only a reader but a lover of books to start with and you want to get into the magic realism style one, this is slightly sci-fi because it's technology based, slightly sort of fantasy because it's kind of a bit of a mystery how this technology actually works, is Jasper Ford's The Air Affair and the Thursday Next series. I've only read the first one in this series. I've got the next one sitting waiting for me to read, but absolute crack up. So funny. Just as funny as Douglas, which is a huge compliment in my world. My next tip for people who are trying to get into sci-fi and fantasy would be to, most people have more access to TV and movies in the sci-fi and fantasy genre. So I would actually go for book tie-ins or books that they're based on. So you know what's coming. It's Harry Potter. Harry Potter all the way. There are so many versions of these books out. They're fantastic, which is why I'm featuring my new illustrated Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. These, although they're heavy, are a fantastic way for people to get into the fantasy genre. It is a very well-known world. If you've watched any of the movies, gorgeous, absolutely rollicking read. This is one I've read multiple times as well. Also for movie tie-ins, the books that they were based on, I would recommend Ender's Game. I read this in year 12 and it was a movie recently, but the movie was kind of a bit but the book is simplistic enough and it's a sci-fi recommendation. Simplistic, yes, but very heavy on social commentary. So that is very interesting if you like that sort of idealism of the way worlds people should act. So really, really good sci-fi one with some moral compass stuff thrown in. I haven't seen this movie yet. I don't know if it's out. I never go to the movies, but Ready Player One, especially if you're an 80s, 90s child, This is fantastic. My aspect that I was looking at it from was just amazing, was having school in the virtual reality world, which is, I read the original sort of cyberpunk style book by Neil Stephenson, Snow Crash, years and years ago, and it really reminded me of that. Wouldn't recommend you start on that one unless you've thoroughly enjoyed some of your sci-fi stuff, but this is a good place to start and go the other way around than I did. This one wasn't out when I read Snow Crash. Not a movie, but very much in the public eye was the stage play Wicked, and that's another idea that you can sort of play with, is more adult versions of and retellings of fairy tales. So that one was The Wizard of Oz, obviously, with the Wicked Witch of the West being the main character. There's a whole series of these books, the next being The Son of a Witch. Then we've got A Lion Among Men, and there's, I think, one or two coming out that have come out after this one. I got this one years ago, and it's a signed copy. They are a wonderful, anything by Gregory Maguire, it's all retellings of fairy tales and those sorts of things. Absolutely amazing and easy to read, I've found. The Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister was the first one of his I read, which is a retelling of Cinderella, and that was brilliant as well. So retellings and of things that you are really familiar are a really good way to get into that magical fantasy type world. Lastly, ones that are TV based, so you can get ones that have come off a book, so things like True Blood. That one's a really good one, a nice easy read to the magical realism style. There's also, if you are into things like Doctor Who, you get many tie-in books that are written by various authors, and those are usually set at a middle grade style level. I wouldn't recommend a new reader go into reading the Game of Thrones book, because that is quite heavy on the fantasy. I found it to be an easy read, but I've been reading fantasy for years and years and years. I also wouldn't recommend some of the more popular TV show books tie-ins as Altered Carbon, because that is a heavy sci-fi book with lots of technical jargon throughout. A brilliant read, and I loved it, but I wouldn't recommend it for someone who's starting out in the sci-fi genre. Nor would I recommend, and because Electric Dreams have been quite popular, which is a Philip K. Dick short stories, I would not ever recommend anyone who is starting out to read sci-fi read Philip K. Dick. That takes some tolerance building before you get to Philip K. Dick. Don't go starting on Philip K. Dick. Can I say Dick anymore? So, the last ones I have for you are, and this sort of makes a bit of sense when you think about it. If you're starting out, you might be quite young anyway. Whenever you start, if you start with middle grade books, then it's going to be of an easier read style. They write them so that they're a bit easier to read. So in that case, I would and have recommended to friends with at work with younger children the David Eddings Belgariad series. This is amazingly well written, and it's definitely aimed at a middle grade sort of level, but it is beautifully written whilst there. I would also recommend Ian Colfer's Artemis Fowl series, which has nice little fantasy elements of fairies and gnomes and all sorts of things in them as well. So that's my recommendations for the SFF Babbles for today. If you have any more questions, please hit me up in the comment section below. If you would like to ask me any questions for recommendations or just in general, please hit me up in the comments below as well. Chuck us a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you very much. Happy reading.